Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm super delighted today to be joined by Peter Dukeman. Peter, thanks so much for being with us today and being part of the conference this year.
Thank you so much. Thank you, JD.
You're very welcome. I'm going to pop some details about how to connect with Peter in the chat in just a moment. But for those that haven't met him before, he's an artist, scholar, and inventor who's made inventions in the designs of calendars for the planets and other fields. I think that some of the coolest stuff about your work, not that I know everything in and out of what you do, but I really love, I've called you a calendrist, multiple times. I know you don't put that name on there, but I still think that it is, or that title on there, but I still think it is like an under, um, how would you say? It's like an under, it's not something that many people take on, and you've taken it on in such a cool way. So I'm really excited for you to share the work. But Peter works within diverse magical systems, Enochian, Hermetic Kabbalah, and magical squares. He developed an approach to spiritual work, which is sensitive to the data of contemporary science, particularly astronomy. His astral magic practice is consequently heliocentric in nature. He holds a PhD in philosophy, sociology, and religious studies. And he currently works as a sculptor and foundry technician in Newfoundland, Canada. So I'm going to pass it over to you, and I'm really excited to see what you're going to share about both your creative contributions and also your presentation for us today. So thanks so much again for being part of the conference this year.
Thank you. Thanks, JD. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so what I'm here to talk about is a particular subset of my work that intersects with the larger project of the calendrics, which is as you rightly said, is really at the heart of what I do. I read the I Ching many moons ago, and in particular, there was repeated references to the magician being a calendar maker, and that really sank in. So I guess I ran with that. But what this is a particular set of methodologies and approaches that I have pioneered that I feel are in a way in their infant stage still, but I think that they have a great deal of potential, especially with working with other people, other magicians. I'm very interested um, in collaborating and sharing ideas, particularly in relation to this set of practices. So, without further ado, let's have a look. So, what we're talking about is realist astral projection, both mnemotechnic and uh, mnemotechnic and visionary. All right. So who am I? We'll be brief about this. I got a PhD for a thesis called The Art of Hidden Causation, Magic as Deep Mediation. You can find it online if you look, if you're interested. And currently I teach courses. I have video courses on Perseus Arcane Academy, on tarot, as specifically timed to a calendar of Venus, as well as a scrying course that showcases how I approach scrying, which is very much tied in with magic squares. Um, so you can check that stuff out on Perseus Arcane Academy, or you can contact me directly if you're interested in doing a live course with me. Um, again, esoteric timekeeping and sundry arts. I have never been one to be pigeonholed into any one particular field. So you'll see material online from me ranging from philosophy to art to kung fu to calendars. So that's what I'm up to. And yeah, so I think the label artist, teacher, philosopher um, works. Just to be a little bit whimsical, I've thrown in a couple of my illustrations just to make the slides more interesting. So this little guy here is not necessarily a self-portrait, but just a bit of my art to make the slides more colorful. So
Peter,
let's
really
have a look at.
quickly, there was a couple of comments. Just, I hear you very clearly. But if there's any way, if you could just speak just a little bit louder or be a little closer to your microphone, that might
Okay,
help
okay.
those that are having any trouble.
How's this?
I hear you really clearly, and I'll let them say if they're having trouble still. But we've got one person who's saying that their volume's up all the way and they're still struggling to hear, but I hope it could be from their side. So you carry on.
Okay, all right. So yeah, what is this? So this talk is in order to present a method of astral projection that is going to investigate the local group of stars as they would appear on an astronomer's stellar map. So we're going to use a sector system uh, and an original methodology, which I call the universal mnemotechnic imager. And so it's a method of realistically exploring the cosmos, respecting spatial position, star type, and size, and accurate ratios of distance and proportion. Of course, I'm just reading this, but the basic gist of it is we're going to talk about how we can experiment with this methodology to project, explore, set up psychic satellites, and attempt ultimately to connect with the intelligence of stars themselves. I mean, there's a lot of talk about um, objects in space. We say objects, but it seems to me a a point of modernist hubris to assume that these incredible beings are objects. So we're gonna assume that a star may potentially be an intelligent being that we can communicate with. And so a big part of the purpose of this is to experiment with ways of connecting non-locally to these entities. And I should also add that this is a magician's project because while it shares the interest in the data of science, it doesn't share the materialist model. And we're talking about uh, an understanding of the mind that doesn't view the mind as fixed inside of the brain within a dead materialist cosmos. Rather, the idea is consciousness as a field has a non-local resonance. I think this is familiar to um, anyone who has gotten involved in magic, synchronicity, uh, and meditation. So this is the viewpoint that we're coming at it from. So we're using materialist, or sorry, we're using scientific data, but we're not using the materialist paradigm. All right. So to really set the stage for this, I should probably say a little bit about my view. So, in my view, which is informed by Jean Gebser's ever-present origin, as well as many other factors, but ever-present origin was a big impact on me. And in that book, the author discusses four structures of consciousness, which he sees as essentially characteristic of four great human epochs. And the structures are the magical, the mythical, the mental, and the integral. In fact, he mentions five: the archaic, the magical, the mythic, the mental, and the integral. The reason I don't mention the archaic is because I don't view it as a structure. I view it as a plenum from which these structures emerge. And what I've done with this epochal structure is I have identified four cosmological models that I view as being the driving force behind each of these epochs. So, in brief, what I would say that we are dealing with in terms of the broader experience of human conscious evolution is there is an intrinsic immersive connectedness to the plenum, if you will, the Tao, whatever you wish to call it. But at a certain point in human development, certain technologies enabled us to step back from it. And the first major one was the compass rose. So the compass rose establishes us at a crossroads or center of directions. And then a lot of people think that the compass rose is obvious, but it would have taken many, many thousands of years to make the observations to draw this conclusion, a conclusion which then allows us to make maps, allows us um, to stabilize our position, and of course, such things as conquest. So it is connected to the Bronze Age, and it is a pivotal moment in the human experience. So this would be associated with what Gebser calls the magical structure. So we now see ourselves as a world in and unto itself. Now this undergoes a boom and then ultimately a bust. It becomes a problem once it essentially succeeds. And it ends up replaced by the mythic structure, which takes this monadic consciousness and puts it through phases and dualities. And this is what myth is understood as. Myth and epic and story take this monadic first order consciousness and extend it into cultural epics and engage with calendars and the concept of time. So in the magical structure is purely elemental. There's no concept of time per se. In the mythic structure, there is. And so I would connect the mythic structure to the Ptolemaic cosmos. So we see what I'm doing is I'm seeing these structures as related to different centerings of human reality. So the first centering is on the crossroads, on the self, the compass rose. The second centering is the Ptolemaic cosmos. So the earth at the center of eight great spheres. And you'll see how, in a sense, the magical structure is actually nested inside of the Ptolemaic structure. The compass rose is a subset of the Ptolemaic. Now, the mythic structure reaches a peak and it goes into its own decline. And then what comes out of it is the mental structure, which begins around 500 BC, according to Gebser. And it peaks in the heart of the Renaissance. It peaks with Leonardo da Vinci's discovery of a vanishing point perspective. But I think what's very clear is the heliocentric model is behind the mental rationalist development. And what it's essentially doing is saying appearances aren't everything. We can do calculation and determine realities that are underneath or belied by the appearances. And so this is really the great leap of the scientific revolution and the great leap of the heliocentric cosmology. And it essentially became the operating system for the modernist mentality up and around till the time of course, Einstein. So the time of the turn of the 20th century, we have this vast shift in our physics, but also astronomically, we're starting to observe galaxies. We're starting to observe worlds beyond this solar system, and so it's starting to look more like Giordano Bruno was right, who's quite far ahead of his time in the heliocentric among the heliocentric thinkers. So we've kind of found ourselves in a Brunaic cosmology, and we're now negotiating a new center, which is, according to Gebser, would be called the integral. And the purpose of the integral age is to take the previous ages, which may be representing worldviews that are at odds with one another, and integrate them together. So they're fundamentally working together. So the way I map this is I view the integral structures related to our coming to terms with the galactic center, and then viewing the heliocentric as a subset, and then the Ptolemaic as a subset, and the compass rose as a subset. So they're all nested together. We do not need to oppose scientific thinking to mythic thinking to magical thinking to integral thinking. What we need to do is we need to figure out how we can have all these conversations on their respective planes, let them do the work that they do, and then come together and look at the whole picture that it pertains to our humanity. What does this have to do with realist astral projection? This lets us talk about the visionary journey into the cosmos, but also hold it in a realist model. So we can use the frameworks and the data supplied by the astronomy, but we can also recognize um, visionary and spiritual aspects, and in particular, these modalities that go beyond the materialist hypothesis, in which we can have the idea of consciousness acting at a distance. So, this is all part of moving towards the galactic or integrative structure. So, so we can move on from that, because I think I've said everything in that little blurb on the right. But to summarize the project going ahead, it's a proof of concept. It's not a fully fleshed, it's not a fully developed field yet, but it's a proof of concept. It's essentially ties into the concept of memorizing star maps, socially memorizing star maps. And what would this mean? This would mean there would be a body of people who knew the local cosmos intimately. And as we live in the information age, where access to information has been kind of swapped out for knowledge, I want to remind us that knowledge is information that we remember. And the more that we can learn to become lore keepers in this respect, the more we will sort of safeguard some of the crucial aspects of our knowledge and of our science, in case of need of a failsafe. Okay, so we're going to be visualizing appearances and scales with accuracy. We're going to exploring the idea of communicating with stars, engaging a balance of science and vision. And ultimately, we want this to be a social practice, because if it's a social practice, then error will gradually be weeded out, because we are dealing with data sets. We are dealing with questions that have definite answers that can be discovered through measurement. So these techniques should probably start as a fairly broad or loose net, but as more people get engaged with it, that net will tighten. So that's basically the concept of science. You throw in a hypothesis and you test it until it gets more and more and more refined. So this is what we're doing. And that's just some of my art on the right. Okay, so we're ready for part 1 of 3. This is the Universal Knowledge Index. What is it? It is a discovery. It is a discovery that probably is on some level comparable to the blockchain, which is a set of mathematical equations that has been turned into an application involving money, right? Cryptocurrencies. Well, this is a mathematical pattern that we will be using to create a framework to allow ourselves to perform this activity of a realist astral projection. And this is connected to an idea that I'd like to raise of an orally transmittable computer. Let us not assume that the trajectory of computer science ends in the physical externalized computer. It began many, 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 many years before a lot of people know. Probably the earliest signs of computer science can be traced back to the 11th or 12th centuries, to the combinatorial works of Kabbalists like Abraham Abulafia or Ramon Lull. And a lot of mysticism and magic is entangled in the history of computer science. And I want to suggest that the future of computer science may involve a mystical turn. So the UKI allows us to conceive of the idea of an orally transmittable computer, a computer made of language and idea that is nevertheless shareable between people. And so this is what we're going to be essentially using. How did I stumble upon this? This all started back with the study of the magic word abrahadabra, which was introduced by Aleister Crowley and is a big part of the Thelemic mythos. But in 2003, or actually about 2001, really, I came across this little arcanum that became very important to me. And I began to study it quite deeply over many years. And what it simply is the fact that the numbers 13 to 31, the sum of all the numbers between 13 and 31, total 418. So 418 happens to be a gematria, which is to say a numerological code for the word abrahadabra. The word abrahadabra can be added up to total 418. Not only that, it also has the same value as the Greek word Pallas Athena. So Abrahadabra and Pallas Athena share this particular number. And I think Pallas Athena is a very appropriate deity in respect to what I'm about to show you. Um, so here we have the equation, the sum of all the numbers between 13 to 31 is 418. If you triple 13, you get 39. If you triple 31, you get 93, which is a major bulimic number. And if you add those two numbers together, you get 132, which has the equivalent to the number of the word Kabal, to receive, the root of Kabbalah. This was very important to me. I spent many years kind of meditating on it and the symmetry of it. I didn't even know very much about what these numbers were, what mathematicians would say about this. I will say a bit more of that later, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the origin of this set of techniques. I ended up mapping this thing out, showing that the series between 13 and 31, they look like mirrors, of course. They're both prime numbers, and there are 19 members of the series, and the central one is 22. So the sum of these numbers is 418, but that's also the sum of, that's also the product of multiplying the number of numbers in the series as well as the central number. So 19 in the series, 19 times 22 is 418. So that's a kind of a symmetry there. And I came to give these the term span, that is the size of the series, and pivot, the central number. So span times pivot equals the span total. So the total of the span is 418. Span times pivot equals the span total. In here, you can see that I have shown that 132 is 66 times 2, and 66 is, of course, the number of units or letters in a fully expanded abrahadabra or abracadabra triangle, because it is the 11th triangular number. 1 plus 2 plus 3, etc. to 11 is 66. So what this kind of encodes is a little hexagram. Okay, so what did I do next? It occurred to me to add this pivotal number to each member of the series and produce a new line. What I discovered was this new line gave us 418 times 2. And I added a new line and a new line and a new line. And what I ultimately discovered is I could generate a magic square with this, which I came to understand as, I came to call Athena's Palace, or the Abra Palace. And this is a magic square. It's not a strict magic square in the sense that it's not a series of numbers where the horizontals, verticals, and diagonals are all the same sum. But what it is a space in which we have a whole bunch of funky pattern. And there are, for example, the diagonals will all have sums that are divisible evenly by 418. And there are a number of dynamics that pertain to this figure that we can use to select cells, to create a selection of cells that we can be guaranteed will be divisible by the span total, which, as I said, is 418. Okay, here's a variant of it up here. This is called the 11-fold room. It's actually exactly the same thing, but I've swapped out some of the prime numbers, so I've been able to give it a smaller shape. Here is these 11 levels, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, up to, of course, 11. That's 66. So you can see that it shares the shape of shares the shape of the abrahadabra triangle. If we extend this further, we can produce a new layer, and then a new layer, and then a new layer. So we can essentially stack it up like a cube. And this is ultimately what I'm trying to get at here, is that we have a cube that can be given a coordinate system. So it's a 19 by 19 by 19 cube that's mentally visualizable. We have a coordinate system, so we can give every layer, row, and column an address. And what we have is a set of rules for selecting activated cells so that they will resonate with the structure as a whole. And the flagged or marked images here, the cells here, are all what we call anchors. So there's a central anchor down the middle, and there's these eccentric anchors um, running sort of in diagonal here. What these are the prime factors. And so the prime factors are what we use to anchor these structures, these resonant structures that we're going to build. And what I now call this is EBPS1. Please forgive me for that kind of clunky sounding name. What is it? An EBPS is an emerp bracketed palatial system. And it turns out there's a countably infinite number of them. And there is a list where each one of these EBPSs, each of which is different, can be put in a serial order and classed and studied. And so what's interesting about it is it gives us a objective series of visualization frames into which these kind of harmonic structures can be built, but it's not fabricated. It's discovered. It is universal from person to person to person. Everybody has the same EBPS chain. So that's very interesting. In that respect, it's a bit like the blockchain. And I'm not a crypto person at all, but this was developed actually over the same time span. So this was developed, between 2003 and 2000 and now, basically, and so it was roughly the same kind of period in which these ideas are appearing in different fields. But it's an objective series of frames. So I got the idea to use the EBPS the EBPS series to essentially to find these different applications for it. And one of them is the UKI. The UKI is the application of the EBPS system that concerns itself with creating resonant patterns and using them as loci systems to store idea sets, imagistic, and visionary presences. So we're gonna we're going to move through this, and I'm going to show you some examples. These are all valid activations within the square. So on the far right is a fairly obvious one. The rule here is that if you're using a central anchor in this particular square, you want 19 centered symmetrical cells activated. But it only needs to have one axis, right? So this is also valid, 19 cells activated, 19 cells activated. This, however, is making use of some of the other anchors. And with the other anchors, the other anchors, you don't actually have to have the same number of cells. Some of them take 11 cells, some of them take 22 cells. But this will guarantee you that the sum total of all the numbers in all the cells, whether in the flat version or in the cubic version, they will always total a multiple of this resonant number that's required. Here we have an example below of a structure that has been put through several frames, like an animation. So these can also move. And as long as they obey the principles of symmetry and anchoredness, these structures be will retain their integrity in relation to the whole. So in other words, this is a lot like a musical instrument. The frame is like an instrument, and the correct use of the cell activations is like playing a chord. So you want to have these resonant activations, but then you can transform them in all sorts of different ways, and you can do all sorts of different things and essentially program it. Without getting into too much detail, I discovered that my Abra key was one of many. I discovered a larger one that has the same basic dynamics, which I mapped out here. And then eventually I discovered that the EBPSs, I didn't call them that. I called them the EBPSs the moment I discovered this chain, because I discovered that emerp, which is prime backwards, is the name of two prime numbers that mirror one another. You'd think it would be mirror prime, but it isn't, because that's something else. In any event, I started to map out these EBPSs, and what's interesting is that they're like the primes. They give us these, they don't follow a strict pattern. They have unpredictable asymmetrical aspects. Some are bigger, some are smaller, no particular order. There's all sorts of interesting, tantalizing, hints at structure and order, but then also elements of chaos, just like the primes, which is really the greatest kind of mystery in mathematics. And so here are the first 18 of these EBPSs. All of this is information that can be used to convert the raw numbers into one of these palatial systems. And here's a big one. This is number 3. This is 37 by 37. Here are the first 4 as mapped out on the number line, right? So here at point 13, we get this 13, this 19 by 19 square. That's EBPS 1. EBPS 2 is this big one. EBPS 3 is this mid-sized one, and then EBPS 4, which is actually unique, it's just hanging out by its own. It's not enveloped or overlapping any others, but it is the greater Abrapalis, as I called it before. But it sort of sits there, and so this is a topology that is objectively present in the emerps, the emerp series, which is a subset of the primes. And so I call these the range 1 because these are all emerps. These are all of the emerps with only 2 digits in them. The range 2 have 3 digits, the range 3 have 4 digits, and so on to infinity. I've only mapped the first 3 ranges, and that includes 120 unique objects in an unpredictable yet objective series that holds the same for everyone. Okay, so why am I presenting this? Well, this is the basic hardware, if you will, for what I'm going to use for the UKI, which is a memory palace system where we create these resonant structures, but we use them as memory palaces. We go in and we fill them up with ideas. We scribe them. We act as magicians. We populate these frameworks, these dry frameworks, which are kind of the dry phase being the raw kind of mathematical phase, and the wet phase being the soaking it with imagery. We are populating them with these visionary experiences. So here's an example of how we can take what I call the basic Atu circle, referring to the trumps. And here we have these 22 cells. These are going to be activated around a 19 anchor or this 11-fold house that I mentioned. And what we're going to do is we're going to input the major arcana of the tarot into them. So this is an example of how we use it as a memory palace, as a universal knowledge index. You can put things in it like really anything. You can put the periodic table of elements into it. You can put the I Ching. You can put any systematic ordering of elements can be stored in some kind of way in this EBPS system. So this is the beginning of what I think could turn into an orally transmittable computer. And that concludes the first part, the Universal Knowledge Index. Turns out that there are multiple applications for the EBPS system, and another one is to use it as a universal mnemotechnic imager. And in this case, we're forgetting entirely about the numerical resonances and the kind of glass bead game of creating these little memory palaces. And instead, we're looking at the sizes of the frames. But we are going to use these same frames. So we are using a gridding system, but it's not arbitrary. We're choosing the grid system based on the emerp bracketed palatial systems rather than just an open arbitrary gridding system, because as you'll see in a bit, this lets us establish resonant relationships and resonant patterns through our magical projections. But right now I want to talk just about the UMI. The UMI is the Universal Mnemotechnic Imager, and it's an application of the EBPSs as visualization frames in order to approximate sizes of different objects when visualized mentally. In other words, we are essentially creating an analytic tool to visualize mentally things at different scales. Not only that, we can use it to zoom in and out and retain structures at these different scales. So normally when we think of a memory palace, we think of going into sort of these dreamscapes that are imagistic pictures of in our mind's eye. But here we are actually rendering them in a kind of a model of 3D. We're training ourselves to go into these spaces, almost like Minecraft, going into these simulated spaces, and then using the frames to judge things at certain sizes. So we can use any EBPS or DPS is a derived palatial system. So the 11-fold room is one of those. But we can use any of these, but for practical purposes, usually it's going to be EBPS 1, the 19 by 19, or the 11-fold room. That's just my approach. So this is where it gets interesting. Here we have an example of using the 11-fold room at double magnitude. What does that mean? That means every cell in the each of the 11 cells has 11 cells within it. So we can scale this to infinity, right? So you can see an 11 by 11 and zoom in on one cell, and it's at 11 by 11. You can zoom in further. And so what we're doing at each stage, meticulously building these scale comparisons so that we can actually start to deal with real stellar distances and train our minds to zoom in and out. So here we have an example of where you set the cell size to a standard. In this case, it is the sun's diameter. And if the central cell is set at the sun's diameter, then Mercury's orbit is going to be approximately here in an 11 by 11 visualization frame. Now, if we enlarge this, we step out, then what we can do is we can see where this fits in a bigger picture. So now we've compressed the first one into the central cell, and we can see where Venus, the Earth, and Mars are, and then of course the gap with the asteroid belt here, and we got Ceres in there, and then Jupiter and Saturn. And then if we've expanded this again, of course, we leave Uranus out because that's not going to be in that frame. But of course, we can expand that frame, and you'll see Uranus there. And then even in this, the actual Neptune and Pluto will be actually outside of the scope of this frame here. You can see I've compressed this whole thing right here, and you can see Uranus is just on the outside of this framing, and of course the outer planets, including the dwarf planet Pluto, are visualizable in their proportionate distance of orbits in relation to this model. So what we can do is zoom in and out mentally while retaining the size and distance of the objects in question. So here are the distances and so forth. Let's look here. Okay, so here we have comparison of the size of objects. So here we have Pluto compared to Mercury, the Earth, Venus. This is just, their proportion in relationship to one another. If we zoom out, we can see them in relation to the larger outer planets, and see this line here right through the center. This shows the diameter of the sun. So now we can compare these to the diameter of the sun, to the inner planets plus Pluto, and their relation to each other. So a study of this will enable us to mentally picture and visualize these at their correct distance and proportion. So this lets us do visionary work that is also essentially empirically accurate. Which gets me to what I think is one of the more exciting ideas in the UMI frame or application. Actually, before I get to that, I want to talk about this here. Here's this map where I've set one cell as one light year, and you can see Sol is in the middle, and then we have Proxima Centauri. Sirius is within this frame. This is the EBPS 1 frame, 19 by 19, so Sirius would appear within it, right on the outer edge. We can, of course, find, this is where the research, working with other people, were really interesting. We can actually get exact addresses for where these stars would be in relationship to one another. So we can get where these systems are. So we can build memorizable, socially memorizable star maps in this way, which I think is fascinating. Um, Here we have what I call the metamagic ladder. The metamagic ladder is an application where we start where one cell is 1 light year. So that's going to be rung 9. Why is it rung 9? Because what I've done is I've zoomed out by factors of 19, and I've gone as many times as it takes to create a frame that can encompass the entire universe. So by the time you expand on it by a factor of 19, 8 times, you've reached rung 1. So rung 1 is the size of the universe. And then rung 2 would fit the Laniakea supercluster visualizable within it. The local group would be in rung 3. You could see the Milky Way galaxy really like full on in rung 6, and then let's see here. Excuse me. Um, then you get the inner solar system rung 12, and you can go all the way down to human scale, which would be rung 21. So this is 21 divisions of 19 from this total picture of the universe. You can keep going. That's the other thing is we're talking astral projection, but this can also go into the microcosm. So you can actually keep subdividing it to the atomic level and so forth, all the way down to the Planck length. And there are, I believe, 50 rungs in this ladder, which is to say 50 levels on which we can populate things. We can start to associate things with these in order of scale, and then we can zoom in and out using our visualization techniques. So that I think is a very interesting and exciting prospect, because this is essentially a universe-sized memory palace that we can use to build and memorize star maps. And so this takes us to the final application of the eBPS system, which I call the magical awareness projector. And you remember at the beginning of this discussion, I mentioned that I am not holding to the materialist paradigm. So I am in resonance, we'll say, with thinkers like Rupert Sheldrake and others who would suggest that mind can itself be extended as a field, and that the visualizations which we project into extended space can themselves qualify as the creation of objects or psychoetheric fields in those extended spaces. So what are we going to do with the magical awareness projector? It is a hybrid of the UKI and the UMI, the Universal Knowledge Index with its resonance schemes and its patterns, and the UMI with its capacity to memorize or to internally visualize and frame scales from the microcosmic to the macrocosmic. And what it will let us do is to project and to establish psychoetheric fields in any location in the current UMI map, limited only by our knowledge and the depth of our practice, both individually and socially. So it will allow mental quote unquote objects to be placed at any location in extended space. Psychoetheric constructs can be essentially grown at locations in space, unlimited by size. So we can begin to create anchors in the solar system, in the galaxy, and beyond. And it allows also these zones to be scryed, which is to say, to be entered into with a visionary modality, and dropping the rationalist materialist paradigm and just letting impressions flow. And in this way, we might be able to communicate telepathically or through vision and inspiration with these entities in the deep, so to speak, by knowing their addresses and by essentially establishing relays of communication by means of psychoetheric fields. And so this will allow for the creation of psychic satellites, and what we could call stargates, which would be arrays of projected resonance patterns that would be placed around stars or in a chain, so that we can, in fact, do a sort of create almost a road through or around the galaxy, where we can do visionary projection. Um, and of course, communicating with stars. This is one of the key ideas, is that I would like to see if we can have visionary communication with specific stars visualized as they would appear. So red, orange, blue, and so forth. Here is like I said, this is a nascent science. It's in its infancy, but here are two applications. Here we have the Earth, where the central cell is 1/3 of the Earth's diameter, and I have put the Attu circle around it. So this is a plan for a set of essentially tarot-themed ethereal projections as a satellite system around the Earth. And what would be interesting is if you flew a rocket ship up there, you could actually pass through the zone that a given Attu was being projected into. And you can see the applications here for group work. And this is a thing that could become quite interesting. Here we have what I call the sunflower array, which is a magical hexagonal tiling of the numbers 1 to 19 in a hexagonal pattern. It's the only possible tiling of these numbers, and it has a powerful resonance of its own. I often scry magic squares. You'll see examples in the latter part of this presentation or in my other presentation. But basically, here we have it actually projected onto the sun, with the central cell actually at the heart of the sun. So if you imagine, this system can be essentially sent forth into the cosmos, if you will, through this use of the UMI. And UMI is used for projecting to the specific space, and then the UKI is used for creating what I refer to as a memory palace. But really, in this case, it's a kind of a resonance system of psychoetheric energy fields that are being placed in these addresses. So we have a complete address system, at least in potentia, for the entire universe. Okay, and so there's lots of future possibilities in my view. Astral satellites, stargates, this concept of a great road, and this is something I'd like to work with people on, is I would like to identify a series of maybe 20 to 30 stars that are around the disk of the Milky Way galaxy, and get their coordinates into one of these imagers, and then do an operation where we build anchors or stargates from system to system to system to system, and thereby create a road through which we can essentially leap in 20 to 30 moves around the whole galactic disk. And of course, I think that this pertains to this idea of working towards the integral structure that I mentioned at the very beginning. Obviously, this also connects to Frank Herbert's idea of the mentat, right? And I don't see the mentat as being a person who has become a robot, but rather a person who has essentially absorbed enough of the kinds of modalities of computer science that their humanity grows beyond the capacities of a computer. So I say we learn from the extended world of computer science, and we develop interior arts, technicologies that can enable us to grow beyond exteriorized, extraneous tech. Oral computers, super calendrics. I haven't talked much about calendrics, but calendrics here was originally called computus around the time, well, that's the calculation of Easter. But computus is an interesting term, and I would say that what I'm doing is related to computus, and of course the Merkaba, right? You can build a little chariot, in your UKI, and then you can travel with it to different locations in the metamagic ladder. So here is Mission Sirius. This is a proposal. I have no time frame for it, but if people are interested and want to contact me, I would like to try an experiment of working with some people to undertake a collective realist astral projection journey to Sirius A and B, establish an astral satellite system around them and around the barycenter of that system, the center of the system, and attempt to establish communications via dreams, telepathy, etc., with those stars. And you can contact me by email if you're interested in this. And here are my contacts. You might want to screenshot this because I'm not going to keep it on too long. And I believe, I hope you got it. All right. Check out my YouTube. There's going to be some stuff here. There's some stuff on my calendrics there. I'm always putting something or other up. And then yeah. Oh no, I didn't put it down. So I've got a list of resources and references at the end of my second presentation. So um, this is the conclusion of the realist astral projection. And I do think I have time for a question or two if anyone has one.
See if people want to pop any questions into the chat, please do. You just add the spotlight here. I mean, it's amazing how your brain works, Peter. Like, I'm sure you've heard this before. Not just your brain, but the extended field of your mind. I think
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
definitely doing something. I can definitely see the overlap between some of what you're talking about and thinkers like Bruno, like where it was like this attempt to sort of um, create something that could also hold this information in a way that didn't burden us with it in the same fashion that we tend to have when we memorize something or come to know something. And so what I would wonder is like as you become as you discovered, innovated, and applied this technology that you are developing, have you noticed that it um, is something that you hold with less and less effort over time? Because it seems, I think probably to some people, it seems like, holy shit, how would I ever fucking keep any of this present? You know what I mean? To be able to visualize it. But then I've had experiences with things like visualizing very extensive body mandalas before through Tantra,
Yeah.
and they sort of have their own life that they come to when you are engaging with them that is not what people would think when they think about concentration in a normal way. So anyway, that's just my kind of connecting point that I could ask a question around it with you.
Yeah, I think in this respect, I want to actually use the term learn by heart rather than memorize. Memorize has the
Yes.
connotation of a rote list of things that, as you said, kind of burden us. But when we learn something like by heart, like the alphabet is a perfect example. Some would probably argue that we're burdened by the alphabet, but
Yes,
really, the alphabet
what?
becomes incredibly mercurial and light on its feet. Similar with music and the scales, or for martial artists, the katas. These things begin as a burden, but they become lighter and lighter and lighter, and they enable a kind of a dance that is itself very fluid and I'll say mercurial and open ended. So I don't actually know where all this goes. Uh, I feel like it's absolutely in its infancy, even though I've been exploring these avenues for seems like quite a long time, 10, 20 years. But I feel like I'm not even going to see really what this is capable of in my lifetime. And it's not just that we ourselves become individually unburdened, but I would say that socially that's the case too, right? So you can see this in the way literacy explodes. Like literacy is a big burden at first, and only a few individuals have it, but after a while, the whole society becomes literate. So I would say the introduction of any new technology like this is um, as the individuals and then eventually the communities begin to internalize it by heart, as it were, then it opens up more and more and more and more possibilities. And
Yeah.
we've seen this explosion in our lifetimes in terms of computer science. I just think that computer science has a destiny beyond the computer.
Thing. There was one question that came through that I think could help people that are interested, but curious, but maybe hesitant or interested in connecting with some of the projects that you were talking about. What It's not that you'd have to walk it through all the way, but what would be some practical applications of these groups? I think you did give it like the idea of setting these things up with Cirrus as an example, but what would it practically involve them doing?
I think it would just start with meeting a bunch of people and having a conversation and throwing
Mhm.
ideas on the table where I've done some groundwork, but I know that there's going to be people who have angles that I don't have. I mean,
Of
I know how
course.
to look up some things. I don't frankly know how to get the coordinates of every single star. It would involve um, it would involve essentially creating a think tank and being committed to seeing what we can do with this, and then pooling resources, and then coming up with a plan. What I would imagine would be kind of either a program or even what you could call a meditation or a ritual, whereby we develop a guided meditation that is based on a knowledge of these techniques, and we would use it to establish these structures, and then we'd talk about the results. That's
Yes,
what I
and I
imagine
think
would be.
there was a comment that sort of is saying what you described, that the mental structure would be built, and then once it's built, something would start to happen.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Well, thank you so much for taking time to share this work, Peter. I think that, as you mentioned kind of in your at your start, I think that a lot of us struggle with the idea of, how would you say, how to make living some of these older ideas when confronted with the data that is often presented by materialist science. And I
Mhm.
think you're not solved for that, but like the way that you found what is useful within the information there, I think is very inspiring. So thanks so much for sharing that.
Thanks, JD. Um, so
So what
I
I
guess
can
now would be a good time to proceed to the second presentation.
Totally. What I can do actually is if I stop this recording, it'll pick it up as another one. It'll make it a little easier for me to edit. So I'm just going to stop this one.
I'll move. Okay.